And Matt, I will let you take this away. I will welcome everybody, and I think we've got about a half dozen here in the room, and then we've got a couple folks online. So hopefully you've got introductions if we think we need them somewhere on the agenda.
Yeah, I think there's so someone just joined us, and we're waiting for Isa to join us too. She's going to be my note taker, so we're going to pause for a few minutes while she gets online.
Yeah, I haven't seen her arrive yet, so
looks like we're still filtering people in. So let's wait 1 minute or two. So.
Okay. Well, while we're waiting, oh, you want her to capture who's here, so we'll give her a minute to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Doesn't mean we have to be quiet on this end. We need to fill the recording up with something. So, everybody have a good weekend. Hey, Tori.
Yeah. Yeah. Not longer. There's more coming in the door right now.
We have to show everybody. I can't see us. We have to show everybody. Okay, well.
Here you go. Need to have some.
Oh, there's Isa.
I see.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're now more or less here. Any indication there's more coming on your end physically, Carla?
Physically, was there anybody else down in?
George part of this?
I don't remember if George is on this one.
He's out. He should be. He's coming. He's in the parking lot.
Is it the last one?
Was he? Okay, then maybe he is. I can't remember who's on that. I get.
I forgot.
Got too many. Yeah, who's who.
Yeah.
So there might be one more person, but I would say let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. Sorry we can't be there in person. Our scope allowed us 2 in-person meetings, and we've already spent those. So that's why we're virtually here this morning. But appreciate your willingness to still participate. Looks like we got some pretty good attendance, both virtually and in person. So maybe I'll ask the in-person group there at City Hall to introduce themselves again, just so that we can keep track of who's here for meeting purposes. And if there's somebody new, or if you're a representative, haven't been to one of these meetings before, if you can just quickly introduce yourself and state who you are and what you're representing, that would be good. So I'll let Carla, you give the direction to the room and tell us where to start. So.
Well, I'll just start and I'll go to my right. Carla McLean, planning official, City of Boardman.
Roy Drigo, Public Works Director, City of Boardman.
David Jones, Planning Commission, City Boardman.
Stephen Fuss, Citizen Committee Member.
Abby Giesler, ODOT Associate Planner. Caitlin Kennedy with Morrow County.
Patrick Healy, Morrow County Public Transit.
Heather Baumgartner, City of Boardman.
Tori Griggs, Boardman Community Development Association, Chamber.
Jacob Kane, Director of Engineering for the Port of Morrow.
Okay, so that's everybody in the room.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna go down the list as I see them and just call everybody out that's on the call. So Patty, Perry.
Hello, I'm with CTUIR.
Dawn.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dawn Hurt. I'm the Eastern Oregon Regional Rep from the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Glad to be here.
Mike Lees.
Anderson Perry, / City Engineer.
I've got Gabe.
Gabe Hansen, the Business Manager of the Morrow County School District.
Marlo. Marlo? Oh, he's there
Yeah.
with ODOT. Let's see, Patty, Mike, Marlo, Gabe, Dawn, Alex. I believe Alex is Alex Hattenhauer. Looks like he's joined by phone. Devin.
Yep, I'm here.
I want to let everybody know who you're with.
Oh, so I'm so late here that I didn't know what was going on. I am Devin Hearing. I am a project contract administrator for ODOT. So I'm the TGM program representative for the state.
Great, thank you. And then I've got Matt and Isa. You're the last two left, I think.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Matt Hugart with Kittleson, consultant project manager lead. And then Isa, go ahead.
I'm Isa Gagulas with Kittleson, doing the analysis on this project.
And then we've got one person who arrived late here in the room. George, you want to introduce yourself?
George Scheimer, Boardman Park and Rec.
Right, I think that captures everybody online and in the room.
Good. Okay.
Matt, take it away.
Okay, yeah, thanks everybody. To be honest, we scrambled and got this meeting in because Carla is going on some vacation time, I believe, starting tomorrow. So we pushed this to the last available day and tried to get this meeting squeezed in because we didn't want to wait another 2.5, 3 weeks to kind of share some of the information we've been creating and developing. So in the stage of this project, we have been working on project development or solutions, alternatives, analyses to address the noted circulation challenges that Boardman is facing over a 20-year period. A lot of those challenges are going to be, or a lot of those challenges exist. We have certain intersections that aren't working really well at certain times of the day. We know we're in sort of a high growth scenario for the city, a lot of new development coming online. That new development is generating new trips and new traffic. And you got some limited infrastructure, connecting infrastructure, particularly with the I-84 sort of barrier that kind of separates the north and the south sides of the city. And with a lot of new development potential in the city, having a good solid plan in place for how to serve that development from a multimodal perspective. So a lot of that all sort of filters into this alternatives analysis. And I'm going to start sharing my screen with a presentation that we had generated. So while I do that and it comes up, let's see, that's not the right one. One second. I just practiced this before the meeting started and now there we go. No, that's still not the right one. I apologize. One second.
Well, this PAC meeting number 3, it looks like the right one.
For some reason I'm not seeing what I want to see on your end. What are you seeing right now? I apologize.
Project schedule, meeting agenda, you're jumping around.
Okay, all right. Well, that is the right one for some reason. I don't know why it was giving me a weird thing. So, all right, so you should be seeing me flop around on the pages now. Is that correct, Carla? Am I on the cover page? Okay, all right.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Why I'm confused is usually there's a little green light that shows up on the screen that you're sharing, and it wasn't clear if that was the right one. So, okay, so PAC meeting number 3. This is technically our last PAC meeting, and it doesn't mean that the project's done after this and your contributions won't be valued. We just don't have a separate scoped meeting beyond this meeting to review the final sort of draft of the TSP. You'll get a chance to look at that, and we'll be sure to share it with you. There just won't be a meeting to go over the details. A lot of what we discussed today will filter itself into the draft TSP. There just won't be a physical meeting to review it, but we'll still give you an opportunity to look at it. So our agenda today, we'll go over the schedule. The real heart of it is showing Tech Memo 6 and the proposed solutions, and then talking about our next steps. So project schedule, we've delivered Tech Memo 6 in a very rough draft format. There's still some work that needs to be done. A lot of that will come out of the discussion we have today. But we'll get that finalized in some of the missing technical analysis, get that back out to you all, and then we'll start drafting the TSP. First draft might come out in maybe late June-ish at the earliest, but more likely filtering into July and August, with the hopes that we'll then turn around into an adoption period here before the end of the calendar year when our contract runs out. So getting right to the task at hand, there's quite a bit of information to share, so I'm going to jump right into Tech Memo number 6. The purpose of this document was to identify and address needs over a 20-year period. Now, as we'll share, some of these needs are really just borrowing information and projects that were in your current TSP or have been identified in other planning documents the city has subsequently amended and adopted by reference. And then the third piece is really just new projects based on new technical analysis conducted as part of this TSP update. And that came out of the last two Tech Memos 4 and 5. And then once we've sort of identified those projects, start to identify funding sources for how to implement some of this stuff. Now, it probably comes as no surprise that a lot of these projects that we'll be sharing with you today will most likely be developed and implemented as part of development in new development projects. Some of the projects, however, will probably need to be capital projects funded creatively, if you will, but most likely through grants and other opportunities to implement, just given the size and the significance of and the cost of some of the projects that we'll share today. So the first graphic I'm sharing here is what I'm calling the proposed functional classification changes. Now, if you recall from our previous Tech Memos, the functional classification system in Boardman today more or less consists of sort of a striation of characteristics. So you got the freeway at the highest order facility representing I-84. And then the city has this orange line, or an arterial functional classification standard. And those roads consist of Main Street and Columbia, Wilson, and a few other roads. What we're proposing is there'll be a handful of new additional functional classification arterials. So they're represented by this dashed orange line. So what are those changes? Well, I've highlighted all of them in yellow. So yellow highlighting on Coonsey Lane. Right now, Coonsey is not an arterial in the city. It's actually shown as a collector. So that just doesn't make a lot of sense given sort of the regional characteristics and the potential for Coonsey to become a pretty significant east-west corridor, particularly in the long run when you get new development sort of filling in on these white spaces down here, and then all this property potentially to the east of Main Street. So an upgrade of Coonsey Lane to an arterial. Other arterial upgrades would be Oregon Trail Boulevard. Now, Oregon Trail Boulevard only exists east of Main Street, but as we'll show here in a minute, there's a vision and a plan for extending Oregon Trail Boulevard west of Main Street all the way over to Paul Smith Road. And that extension would also be given sort of the arterial designation. And one of the reasons for kind of bumping Oregon Trail Boulevard up to an arterial given is I think associated with its long-term potential. So if you think of Oregon Trail Boulevard extending over to Paul Smith Road in the future, it really becomes a third major east-west corridor on the south side of the town. And then ultimately, as we'll show here, it'll extend over to Olson Road. And then long run, if and when the city ever gets around to potentially expanding its UGB, you can think of Oregon Trail Boulevard extending Long Run all the way over to Laurel Lane. And when you do that, then you've got really a strong third east-west arterial. So that would be another upgrade on the arterial side. And then for some reason, Laurel Lane over here on the east side of town is not shown as an arterial south of the interchange. And it just sort of makes sense given how that road functions today and how it could potentially function in the long-term future when you start to get some infill or some expanded UGB on the east side of town. Let me pause there and see if that generated any discussions or comments from folks in the room or online. Okay, hearing none, I'll just keep going.
Unstable. So you've kind of gone in and out.
Sorry, what was that, Carla?
Lost you and got you back. So I'm curious if the folks online.
Yeah, actually.
Matt's been steady on my end, Carla.
Definitely our end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure what you heard and didn't heard. And so at the risk of repeating everything, I was just kind of ending with are any comments on the proposed modifications for the arterials on the map here?
System and kind of what the difference is between an arterial, a collector, and then a local road. I mean, I think I know there's some experts in the room because of where you work and what you do, but there's a couple of folks in here that this might be kind of new to. So
We're working on getting all like the speeds designated, like was it balancing out the speeds and different uses and different types of uses that are going to be on each of those?
So classification is not specifically attached to uses. It's really about its function within the system.
Okay.
So if you think about the street you live on, let's say you live on Mount Hood or Mount Adams or Boardman Avenue. You live on a local street, and that local street will funnel into what's called a collector. And that's a street that's kind of maybe internal to that neighborhood, but is a more defined, get you from north to south or east to west road. And so if you live in River Ridge and you live on Eagle, you live on a local street. But when you get to River Ridge, you're now on what we're going to call in the future, I believe, a collector. And then as you get to Coomsey or you get to Wilson, you get on an arterial. So it's kind of it's a hierarchy that you get to. Yeah.
I like the Northwest First Street upgrade because I live on that street and it's definitely busier than what it was previously classified as.
Yeah, I think Northwest First is one of the ones that's moving from a local street to a not an arterial, but a collector. Mhm.
And this I see stuff all the time. There's so many cars. And then like right on the corner of Park and Northwest First, they're with that little alleyway that's in between those two streets, there are people doing like they turn around there all the time. Right. And trucks are there all the time too.
This designation change doesn't necessarily change the features of the road. It's just the way it's designated though, correct?
Right. Now, it could change the features over time based on our road classifications. And so, we'll have different design and build standards as you kind of move from a local street to a collector to an arterial. But you wouldn't see those changes happen immediately. It would happen upon a future build or a future redevelopment or something along those lines. Yeah.
I guess maybe what I'll say is regarding this map, is there anything that maybe people disagree in without going through every single change here? But we do have upgrades to certain roads. Those are all highlighted in yellow. Anything with a dash line would be a proposed modification to that classification. And what might be a little confusing is we don't have the future extensions of roads on this map because one that will come in a later version of this map. I just wanted to highlight what we are potentially proposing to change for what is already built today, not what would be built in the future. And that'll come here in a few slides. So maybe just one final time, any potential conflicts or changes or disagreements with any of the changes we're proposing here? Okay, hearing none, let me just move on. Doesn't mean we couldn't come back to these, but we'll just, for the sake of keeping us moving, I'll move on. The next slide here is what we're calling proposed federal functional classification changes. So you might be asking yourself, why do we have a federal functional classification? Why do we have a local classification? Well, the local classification is from the previous slide is what Boardman identifies for the roads in its city. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it owns all of those roads, such as I-84, for example, that's owned and maintained by ODOT, but the city still classifies it as a freeway. And so that's what the local kind of functional classification, the previous slide. This slide here is representing the federal functional classification. And it is a separate classification that is assigned to most roads on the system by the federal government for the sake of identifying it on the federal system. So it doesn't mean that the federal government owns all of these roads, but there are certain roads that would be eligible for funding for upgrades, but you're only eligible if you've got a designated federal functional classification on it. And as I'm going to advance one slide here. So anything that you see in yellow, surprisingly, is the only thing in the city that has a federal functional classification on it today. So oddly enough, and I don't know how or why it happened this way, but a bit of Coonsey Lane out of town up to Main Street, and then Main Street all the way up to Columbia, Wilson Lane from Main Street east out of town, and then Columbia Avenue, at least from Main Street over to Olson. And then there's a bit of the roads in the Port of Morrow that have a classification, including Marine Drive, Ullman, and this little remaining bit of Columbia Avenue. How or why that ever came to be, I don't know. But within the context of this TSP, it's within our purview to review that and to recommend changes so that city staff can work with ODOT, the respective Region 5 planner, to get those classification changes made. So what we've done here on this map is at least try and identify what we believe to be the appropriate federal functional classification. So they include maintaining the rural interstate designation on I-84, and then adding in a series of minor arterials and collectors to the city's network. And these lines on this map represent what we believe to be an appropriate classification based on our own proposed local classification system, and then using the context of the federal classification to kind of merge it over and make sure it's consistent. So I don't expect there'll be a lot of comments on this map, but this is just one of those little necessary things that we typically get into when we update these local TSPs. So.
Now, my recollection from being at the county is that those federal classifications came about because there was some desire to have an I-84 like emergency route or alternative. And I think that's where the Coonsey and Wilson, because that connects you from Tower to bombing range. The ones north of the freeway, I'm less clear about, other than Columbia is the old highway. I mean, you have to go back a couple of iterations, but Columbia is the old highway.
You're probably right, Carla. That makes some sense.
Yeah, and the Ullman is probably related to the connections to the water.
Yeah, I believe it probably came about as a result of some efforts to make sure that those roads, as we'll see here in a little bit.
We figure out Columbia's.
Yeah, because right there, you can see where it goes out and it heads into the water. It's really old.
I just know that line continues in the county. So yeah.
Okay, well, don't have to spend any more time on this one. It's just kind of an interesting feature that probably needs to be changed over time. So the step on this one, we'll include it in the TSP, but you know, the long-term step is city will work with ODOT's Region 5 planner and they'll start a process to get these roadways designated on the federal functional classification system. So on the non-state highway system. Okay, moving on. Sticking with the context or the theme of classifications, one of the things the city does not have at the moment, it's kind of informally noted, is how do we deal with freight? So there's kind of two kinds of freight. There's industrial, long haul, regionally freight oriented trips where they're generated to and from industrial uses or manufacturing uses or commercial uses that have a lot of deliveries. And then you've got sort of what we call local freight. And local freight could be as simple as, you know, your Amazon deliveries and other non-consistent, generally smaller freight that's serving commercial and or local uses. So we came up with this map to help the city designate what we're calling the regional freight routes and the local freight routes. And I think this is sort of a nod to the Port of Morrow and its prominence in the city, part of the city anyways, is make sure that from a freight designation standpoint, we're clear on where we want freight to orient itself, certain types of freight related trips, and where we don't want freight to be using. So I guess the point here is, while the Main Street interchange is a viable route to some of these industrial uses in the Port of Morrow, I think the city would be looking to expect most of those freight oriented trips to continue to use the Laurel Lane interchange. And quite frankly, I think most of those trips are doing that. But from a policy standpoint, I think a map like this would make a lot of sense for the city. And so this would be our proposed breakdown of those regional freight routes and then those local freight routes. So opening this one up for comment and interpretation, anything jump out at you as something that we would consider changing or want to change?
So Matt, I think we want to make sure, and Jacob and I talked just briefly before the meeting. I'm going to say one introductory comment and then I'm going to let him take over because I think he's got a number of requests and inquiries, but I want to make sure that we acknowledge the high, heavy, I never did this quite right, high, wide and heavy designations in here. And with the limitations relative to at grade railroad crossings and some weight limitations on a couple of bridges that go over the UP. Jacob, take it away.
So I think you hit your nail right on the head from a traditional freight standpoint. But what's a little bit more specialized is our bulk cargo coming off of the river for specialty loads. And unfortunately, a lot of those are generated in Terminal 1 and Terminal 3, mostly Terminal 3 as of today, but really heavy loads that exceed like 166,000 pounds. We're pretty limited on the bridge crossings, and it really determines whether basically if that heavy load's going east or it's going west. Our westbound loads have been pretty the only route that we can get across the UP main line is just west of the Main Street Bridge. The eastern route, we have to go all the way out to Patterson Ferry or go through Umatilla in the city of Hermiston. And most of those are like Idaho bound or eastbound type cargoes, but the big loads going westbound, and a lot of those go to transmission substations and whatnot, at our, a lot of the solar or wind farm projects going on to the south and to the west of us, and that at grade UP crossing just west of the Marine Drive is really our only route out of there. But that would be a specialty load and not necessarily a traditional freight route.
Yeah. I've fully anticipated a comment from you and others who pay attention to that level of detail. And I'm wondering, maybe Jacob, could you mark up this map with some of those routes? I know, and this is not news to us. I know from a scenario standpoint, sometimes you have to run loads on the Main Street corridor simply because of the reasons you noted. And I'm wondering if we or the city, if in more general terms, should be recognizing that, or do we recognize it as just a specialty, like oversized load route? It doesn't mean that we want consistent use of that route, but we recognize it as a special route in certain circumstances. And does that specialty circumstantial scenario belong on a map like this, right? It's sort of a lot of questions to ask ourselves from a policy standpoint, and how do we want to acknowledge those special circumstances, if at all?
So there's some very high level funding approaches going on with the High, Wide, and Heavy Commission that we're a founding member on. And I think it would be, if it didn't show up in the local TSP, from origin, it might not look as good as it would if we did include it in some way, shape or form.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what that would need to look like, but some type of, line on a map or something would be very beneficial for when we go after those funding mechanisms.
So maybe it's not part of the proposed freight route map, but maybe it's a secondary map. Maybe there's a figure, if this is figure 3, maybe it becomes figure 3A and figure 3B. And 3B is the high, wide, and heavy map.
Sure, and I can share those maps. Those have been, maps for quite some time.
Well, I think we had something previously that we incorporated those maps in, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can forward those to you guys. There's 3 separate routes, right? We've got a heavy route going west, a heavy route going east, and then also a long route going west and a long route going east. So there's kind of a dimensional, issues as well as weight issues. So.
Okay. Well, Jacob, why don't you resend us what you believe to be the most recent versions of that, just so that we can confirm we do have all of those informations. What we could potentially do is mark up a version of this map, or as Carla suggested, maybe there's a 3B version of it that deals with those special scenarios, and make sure that's captured correctly. And then we'll share it back with you for confirmation that it's graphicked appropriately. Okay. Anything else? I fully expected that comment to come up, so I was prepared for that one, but anything else? Okay. Well, we're going to come back to this issue a little bit here in a little bit as we get into the solutions projects. And that begins now. So this is figure 4. And this is a figure that kind of collectively identifies specific projects on existing corridors and future corridors. So you're going to see a lot of lines on a map like this. And this is talking about roadway upgrades, new roads, roadway upgrades, intersection modifications, intersection traffic control needs. Everything's just sort of itemized here, but this is specific to, I think, the movement of motor vehicles. And there's a couple of nuances here that I'll point out. As you'll see, a lot of roads and lines on this map are new roads. Like, for example, we talked about Oregon Trail Boulevard. It doesn't exist west of Main Street, but it will in pretty short order. And so we've identified project R3 that would extend Oregon Trail Boulevard from Maine all the way over to Paul Smith. Now, Paul Smith is an existing road, but it's not an upgraded road. So we've got a project as R9 to upgrade Paul Smith Road, right? Yep. To a more of an urban standard according to the functional classification map that we had shared back over here, which would be showing it as a local road and or an upgraded neighborhood collector. So so a lot of what you're seeing on here are upgrades to existing roads or identification of projects that would build new roads. Now, Oregon Trail Boulevard is unique because that's likely to be a capitally driven project. But we've got other projects down here, for example, R10 and R11 and all these R12s, 14 and 16s. These are roads that don't exist today. But we worked kind of closely with Carla and her staff and tried to identify rough alignments for what those roads could look like if and when development ever materialized. So let's take, for example, this big parcel here that's sort of bordered by Olson to the west or east, Main Street to the west, Wilson to the north, and Coonsey to the south. That road, I'll just bring over another aerial map here. That is this big old dark pivot irrigation field parcel right here. Plus, some other parcels that are occupied by farms and households, rural households.
We're not seeing your aerial,
Oh,
Matt. We're not
sorry.
seeing your aerial.
I don't know why. Oh, it's because I'm not sharing that particular screen. Anyway, I think we can visualize that one.
Yeah.
But it's that big undeveloped parcel, right? That's big giant pivot irrigation field. If and when it ever develops, right, we want to make sure we've got at least the bones or the structure of the roadways that would help to serve that development. So we've sort of envisioned kind of two north-south neighborhood collector level roads. That's represented by R12 and R16, and then one kind of east-west sort of spinal route that would be a mid-block route between Wilson and Coonsey. And so, these lines are just lines on a map. They're point A to point B. In reality, if and when development ever materializes, developers would use a map like this to start to piece together their circulation system for the parcels. Now, this map doesn't include all the little local streets and local roads. Those are not really typically regulated by a TSP. But what we want to do is make sure we set the sort of the standard or the foundation for how to accommodate that development in the long run. Now it's up to the developers and the city staff to interpret this map, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that R12 needs to be a straight line from Wilson down to Coonsey Lane. It can kind of wind around, but the scenario is we want to at least establish the vision. So we want two north-south neighborhood collectors and one east-west collector to sort of fulfill the circulation needs of these larger parcels when they come online. So that's what a lot of these lines on this map are showing. And before we get into the specifics of some of these, is there anything about sort of these lines on the map that anybody had a particular comment on or didn't feel was appropriate, or you had a question about, or something that just sort of stands out as odd? Again, we're trying to sort of pick up the pieces and fill in the gaps for a lot of these parcels that have yet to develop, but most likely could or would in the long-term future. I see a hand up from Marlo online.
There's some partitions and there's an easement that's identified on one or two of those parcels.
Yeah.
So we picked up where that easement was.
Where's that easement at?
I couldn't tell you.
And Carla, R18 and R19 goes through that property that we just sold to Good Shepherd.
Yep.
Are those still gonna be there?
Yeah. I don't know if it'll be exactly what they're shown on this map. These are just kind of, again, so my experience when I first started dealing with the Boardman and Hemingway transmission line is when you put a line on a map, everybody assumes that's where the line's going to be. This is a depiction of what could happen.
Okay.
It is not identifying that this will happen in this way. So yes, when they come in with their proposal, we've met with them once for an hour. So we've had a very, very simple initial conversation, and they know they've got a lot of planning on the front end to do, but they also know that the city has an adopted downtown development plan and a variety of other things. So how it will eventually look is going to be dependent upon what they need, and then what they need marries with what the city would like. And we had a conversation with them about some of the things that the city would like, but they've got a lot of work to do. So is there concept there? Yes. Actually, when you look at the downtown development plan, all three, City Center, Kincaid, and Willow Fork all show as going into that property. Will that happen the way it's written? I don't know. I mean, it really it depends on when they come back with their proposal and how we work through the planning process.
Marlo has.
Yep. So Matt Marlowe's got his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Marlon.
Yeah, I was just curious about on the next figure, there's a new local road proposed just north of Oregon Trail Boulevard that didn't show up on here. And so that's, within the 15-20 into something we're interested in. I was just curious why it didn't show up on here with, one of your circles as well. There wasn't much about that orange line.
Marlo, which figure are you referring to that you see it on a separate figure, but not on the one shown on the screen here?
I see it on figure 5.
Figure 5. Let me show that one real quick. Sorry, I'm going to zip past. Okay, so are you referring to what's going on right in here?
Yes, because I was just curious, for ODOT perspective, I was curious about that new road, and I didn't see a lot about it.
Yeah. Yeah, great comment. I don't know which graphic to focus on here. If I show some of my other ones, I'm gonna get us too far astray here. But let me just show what this figure 5 is. So figure 5 builds upon the collector and higher level roads that were shown.
Yes.
Back here, right? All these red and green lines, they're primarily focusing on your collectors and higher. They're not focusing on local streets. TSPs typically don't outline the specificity or the alignments or even the rough alignments of local streets. What they typically do, however, is we like to show what we call assumed future connections. So figure 5, Marlo, is showing in orange where we would want to see local street connections occurring. So you pointed out what's going on here. The interchange area management plan for the Main Street IAMP that was adopted back in 2009, it envisions this backage road we're calling Southwest First Street. The Southeast First Street was recently reconstructed, so now it connects Oregon Trail up to front. This backage road will connect over here, but the IAMP does show a number of local streets backfilling and serving the redevelopment on both the east and west side. So these orange lines in here don't necessarily represent collectors. They just represent future local streets that could be developed to help support those uses. Now, if you go deeper into the IAMP, those local streets are envisioned most likely to be limited access connections to Main Street. And so they're not likely to be full access right off of Main Street. So that's what these orange lines are representing. In particular, the ones just to the south of the interchange is a representation of what was in the IAMP adopted back in 2009.
So, question, R6, is that what is currently Quail Lane going across there?
R6?
Yeah.
Give me a sense where R6 is here.
Anderson Road to Wilson.
Yeah.
So R6 is really unknown. So I don't know that. So R19 connects to R6. I don't know that in the end R19 and R6 will actually connect. I mean, that's a really big question. There is a vacant lot in that manufactured home project that we could potentially acquire for a street connection. We've been going back and forth internally as to whether or not we should or shouldn't. R6 is, again, I don't want you to think that R6 is on a map and that's where R6 will go.
Right.
But we are thinking about how do we take the Bailey Park subdivision that is in phase 1. They're going to come in with phase 2, 3, and 4. We think over the next little bit. How do we connect Bailey Park? It connects already to Anderson. Is there a way to connect Bailey Park to Wilson? I don't know. There's some vacant properties in there, and then you get into the UGB area. So the city is the beige and the white is the UGB. Again, there as with both R4 and R6, when you get into the UGB, R4 has a pretty clear path. R6 has a less clear path, but there is some property in there that is oddly shaped and appears to have a flag or a pole to the flag that a road could connect on. That's generally where it is. That's not specifically where it is.
And so I just pulled up a map. I was just looking at, my initial question was R16 not connecting through to R13, right? And besides the fact there's residences there, as we look at a 20-year plan, as those places become available, or like, I just didn't see it on that list. So I pulled up another map, and Quail Lane appears to be roughly in line with where R6 is. But again, I understand that if that's a private
Yeah.
road, then it's not anything.
And I think that's where that flag is. I don't know if it's exactly where Quail is, but you can see that flag, Matt's there. That's the pole right there on that end. That's what we looked at when we put R6 on the map. And again, I don't know that R6 is exactly in that location, but that's what we were looking at, because we were thinking if we figured out how to phase Bailey Park right, and then as the next lots develop, we could get to the point where we get something going east and west through there. It would never street, at best, a neighborhood collector.
Right. And just for my clarity, these designations are 1, 2, 3, are just designators, not a timeline of.
Nope.
It's a random number.
Is that, well, I don't think it's a timeline. R23, R24, and R25 are programmed.
I didn't see them.
Yeah, the numbers, Carla, the numbers on the map don't mean anything. It's just the order in which we had created them. We can reshuffle the numbering if you want. So don't worry about the numbering. It doesn't have any bearing on
They have
temporal issues.
nothing to do. Any other questions? Did we answer everybody's questions? Cool. Okay, back at you, Matt.
Okay, now comes the fun part. Simply because now's the interesting part of some of the things that we're dealing with here. So, okay, back to the PowerPoint. So I guess maybe my general ask would be anything else that pops up in this map regarding the specific projects. Oops, let me hit square.
Yeah, you need to share again.
Yep,
Thank you.
right, yep. Okay, so any questions or challenges on any of these alignments, please share those back to us. We don't pretend to nail this the first time. And there might be some tweaks to these roadways, but again, they're just lines on the map. So, however, we want to spend the rest of the presentation talking about our best and most challenging area, which is Main Street, and particularly the Main Street I-84 interchange area. You'll see on this map, there's a lot of intersections popping up on this map. And to quite honest, there's some challenges that we are struggling with a little bit. And I think the city is going to have to face some harsh realities. So this map here, it's a little blurry, I apologize for it, but this goes back to our original tech memo 4 and 5 work where we were projecting growth scenarios in the city. Each of the red outlined areas represent reasonably likely parcels that city staff felt are likely to develop over a 20-year period. Doesn't mean that all of them will. It doesn't mean that they will develop exactly as outlined here, but based on information and interest from the development community and the zoning for these parcels and their adjacency to existing development, it was felt that one or more or all of these parcels could reasonably develop. So we projected some traffic growth related to that development. Now, all of these red squares here represent a combination of either residential or highway-oriented commercial, retail, apartments, single-family houses, you name it, right? That all generate trips. But if you look at the gravity of where they're located, right, most of it is south of I-84, and most of it is west of the Main Street corridor. So if you look at where that growth potential is, And where that development, if it was generating new trips, it's still focusing itself back to Main Street and then back to the I-84 interchange. It would be a different scenario if, for example, we had red lines popping out way over here. Then I think you can reasonably assume that maybe some of those regional long trips, for people commuting into Hermiston or the Tri-Cities or Pendleton or wherever, maybe some of those trips would focus back to the Laurel interchange and use that interchange. But you have most of it occurring still in a part of the city where the quickest and fastest route to I-84 and to a lot of where your existing services are located still puts a lot of demand and pressure on Main Street. So I'm pointing this out because I think it's important from a long-term planning perspective. If you know where you're reasonably likely to continue to see growth, it still puts and is expected to put a lot of demand and pressure on the I-84 Main Street interchange. So with that in mind, we tested a couple of scenarios, however. So one of the things we tested was what happens if you were to connect another road across the freeway. And the one that always comes out more than others is Olson, right? Olson, it's a little blurry in the aerial here, but it comes up right at the edge of the Amazon project and sort of terminates. But you could reasonably foresee, and your current TSP does envision a connection of Olson across the freeway, whether it goes over or under or some other version. It does have a connection in there. So we tested that scenario. And the basic question we were trying to answer is, if we snapped our fingers and made that connection today, how much demand, current demand and future demand, would naturally use Olson compared to Main Street? And one of the things we found, and we're doing this at sort of a micro simulation level, right? We're not using complex travel demand models. So we're doing the best with the tools that we have. But when you connect Olson, what we found is the amount of traffic that would potentially shift over to Olson, away from existing corridors like Main Street, is not that significant. In other words, if you look at where you've got all this residential development today, as well as all this other potential future residential development, where is some or a lot of that traffic trying to go? Well, it's trying to go to the high school and the middle school, which is on the north side. And if you look at Olson, right, Olson provides a back door, but it's not as convenient as Main Street. Olson doesn't provide access to a lot of the services that you have over here. It provides an alternative, but it's still your retail and your gas and other things are still on the Main Street corridor. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is, even if we were to snap our fingers and bring an Olson into the equation, one of the things we found is we're not shifting a significant amount of demand away from the Main Street corridor to the point that it reduces some of the forecasted traffic conditions that we're finding here. I think that's an important kind of finding, because Olson, while there's a potential for it, it's not an easy and inexpensive connection. Even if you were to go under I-84, that's still a pretty expensive visionary project. So it kind of led us back to the path of, okay, if we can't realistically envision Olson, and more importantly, we're finding that an Olson connection just really isn't eliminating some of the demand forecasted on the Main Street corridor. What do we need to do to Main Street itself and the interchange terminals to make it function better, or to help it function better? So that's what the rest of this presentation on. Before I go there, let me pause and let the people online or in the room get a question or two.
So, dumb question, if we're hoping and dreaming, and Olson, I see what you're saying, given the conflict with the way it's growing, elevation wise, the road is higher on the north side of I-84 on the other side if we put through, right? So you wouldn't go, let's say, Failer through that undeveloped area and put so essentially an Olson on the other side of I-84, where we do expect Boardman to grow on the west side into that undeveloped area. Is that a more feasible piece? Like I said, I think the elevation wise, it's quite a bit higher on that side, isn't it, on that Main Street side? That would require Front Street to be developed further over by the Knights Inn and that side, but would allow, even if it was one block and you did directional traffic. Again, we're looking at 20 years into the future. So as this thing grows, and just to mark those lines on a map for the potential for those high level funding things or whatever comes around, that could potentially open up another access point from the rail yard on that side, right? Coming through some piece to mitigate that Main Street side. Does my question make any sense? Is it completely?
I'm trying to get my head wrapped around where you're talking about.
So if you can't cross the freeway at Olson, can you cross it at Baylor? I would say almost Willow Fork would be better. Baylor's better because it's a straight road and you just keep going straight across. But you're so far, what you get into on the north side of the freeway becomes ownership issues become problematic, and wetlands and wet areas become problematic. But I think it's a really interesting concept. I think it's worth at least noodling.
So if we go back to Olson, what if you just had, instead of crossing the freeway, but you just brought a westbound exit into Olson and an eastbound exit into Olson on the south that would continue your loop without having to cross the freeway? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Westbound, exit on, exit off, eastbound. So you don't cross, but you can come off.
That would alleviate some of your I-84 traffic to and from.
Yeah, then, so if you're coming off and you can't do a left off of I-84 north, right? So you can't get to the Sinclair. But if you turned off Olson, went down to Columbia and came up, then you could get there.
I think that concept would
You'll have
potentially drive your development side too, right? Yeah, that could absolutely make someone more interested in developing on the east side of Boardman, south of Main Street.
Yeah.
Plus, it gives everybody more access to the Sage Center, which is being advertised as a tourist destination, or like as a tourist spot for our town. So that would drive people into there, especially because it's also a welcome center for Oregon because of the 82 Hermiston connection up into Washington.
North and south side, yeah.
Charging station.
And there's all sorts of reasons to come off at Olson, but much cheaper version is to not have an overpass, just an exit on, exit off.
Yep.
On both sides, and then that can continue your loop to the city side.
And now everybody getting off at the port has that additional access so that they don't have to fight with the truck traffic. They don't have to fight with the Main Street traffic. They can get to and from work.
And they're not backed up down the freeway at the Port Amaro exit.
Yeah, right. I think that is a completely viable.
So
Because there is an elevation issue with going over or under on Olson.
yeah. I'm gonna, if I could, I'm gonna ask Marlo, I don't know if you're on or you're listening right now, but I imagine you have a comment or two on that one. So yeah, go ahead, Marlo.
Yeah, so I hear what folks are saying. So it would be virtually, and I would say not even virtually, it would be impossible to add ramps at Olson. Our freeway spacing minimum spacing is 3 miles, and there's not much after connect, goes all the way to the feds. We're already not there between our two interchanges as we are. So adding anything at Olson, I think would be impossible from an approval standpoint. I've thought a lot about, like, is there a way to add or remove ramps from Main and put them somewhere else? And there could be ways to do that, but adding stuff at Olson and not making reductions somewhere else, I think would be impossible.
Even if you just extended your on-ramp from the Port Amaro exit, so the on-ramp westbound, if that just continued and just turned back off at Olson. Does that make sense?
I'm not following what you mean there. The on-ramp westbound.
So let's see if I get the cursor. So this one here, came up and just continued and turned off here.
Are you seeing our cursor, Marlo?
No, I'm not.
Oh,
Oh, because Matt's sharing his screen.
Yeah, sorry, I'm
Yes.
sharing the screen. I apologize. I just tried to get to a better aerial. I think what I'm hearing is rather than bring the on-ramp here at, could you do a split interchange where the on-ramp is not at Laurel, but it comes in off of Olson, is that right?
no, just extending the Port of Morrow, that lane that comes up, that just continues all the way to Olson and goes back off. Right.
Okay.
I'm not an interchange person, but I think that I stand by what I said earlier, that anything here is going to be very, very challenging. Because we already don't have adequate spacing, to standard between Laurel and Main. So anything in between there is going to be looked at with pretty high level of scrutiny. And we got to be really careful about weaving as a concept becomes quite challenging when you have things too close, right? With our ADT, it probably works, but when you start to get even more volume and you're trying to get people to get on and off at Olson, we create quite challenging traffic conditions. And so, it could be looked at, but I'm pretty skeptical that we could get away with anything at Olson.
So how I understand it is the problem is at Main Street, correct? So why couldn't we just extend the on ramps down and extend the bridge? Make the bridge wider and extend the on ramps down.
I think
Wouldn't that solve most of the
I
problems?
think you're hijacking Matt's next comment. You're a little ahead of him, but
Yeah.
yes.
No, I think that's part of the next couple of slides here. But before I leave that, so I guess maybe put a couple of comments to rest a little bit. So using this better aerial, the first thing we tested was if you made a connection to across Olson from south side of the freeway that does not include any ramp terminals, right? It's just an underpass or an overpass, you pick. I think what we're basically saying is the amount of demand that it would shift away from Main Street is not as significant as we would have hoped. Now, I heard another comment saying, what if we pushed Failer across on the west side over here? Now, I think generally speaking, that would do a lot more to relieving demand on Main Street. But the challenge is once you've made it across the freeway somehow, some way, there's no infrastructure on the north side that would naturally accept that demand without sort of disrupting current development patterns. So for example, even if you could get over on the north side, you certainly don't want that traffic filtering onto Columbia or Boardman Avenue going through these neighborhoods. And then you've got sort of a railroad sort of blocking your path on the north side, leaving you with really, if you could thread a road, sort of in between the freeway and current development connecting over to Front Street, you don't have, I think, the capacity and the spacing on Front Street to accept all that demand without creating a sort of a pretty congested scenario on the north side. So I think that's the challenge with something like Failer is you just don't have the receiving land on the north side like you do on the west side or on the east side over here to accept an opportunity like that. It's an interesting concept and it does make some some improvements, but it certainly doesn't have that implementation element that you might have otherwise.
But that's in the same thing Martin was saying. It's within 3 miles. They're not going to approve that anyway.
Right.
Just be underneath.
So I guess in our mind, I'm going to stop sharing and go back to the presentation here. It leads us to the path of what can we do at the existing interchange to eke more capacity and to make it better. And that's not easy. So let me show this next couple of slides. So I created this just to kind of represent the visual of this dynamic corridor. So everything in yellow, a solid yellow line represents existing roads. So you got Oregon Trail Boulevard down here, and then you got the new southwest or southeast First Street and Front Street connecting in very short order. We'll have a similar version of that occurring on the west side, and then we'll have an extension of Oregon Trail Boulevard. So you kind of have the beginnings of a series of solid backage roads on the south side of the freeway, serving future development and redevelopment in these areas down here. When those backage roads in Oregon Trail Boulevard are fully established, the interchange area management plan for this interchange, adopted again back in 2009, called for Front Street to be limited to right in, right out movements, kind of represented by this blue line. So what happens when you do that? Well, if you're northbound on Main Street, you can make a right turn onto Front Street. But if you're on Front Street and you want to get back to Main Street and you wanted to go north, it's just a simple right turn only. But if you wanted to go south, you got to circumnavigate back on these parallel backage roads. And then vice versa, if you're on this side, if you're coming off the freeway, you'll make a right turn onto Front Street and visit your business or your place of destination. You want to go back to the freeway, you got to circumnavigate back to the south and then come up Main Street. Well, all of that rerouting has sort of projected the Main Street Oregon Trail Boulevard intersection to need some upgrades beyond the two-way stop control. So we've got a project in there that looks at establishing traffic control improvements at that intersection, labeled as number 3 here in the long run. Now, what happens if you implement that same right in, right out characteristic on the north side at the North Front Street intersection? Well, what that does is it puts and circumnavigates the demand back to and including Boardman and Main Street. Now, this has been a subject of a lot of discussion at the city side. So intersection 2, Boardman and Main, what do we do at that intersection when we implement these right in, right out limitations at Front Street? Well, intersection number 2, Boardman and Main Street, immediately moves to sort of an overcapacity scenario for its existing two-way stop control, particularly with sort of the peak hour demands that the middle school and high school generate at certain times of the day. So intersection 2 needs some enhancement, capacity, and traffic control upgrades. That's the easy part. The hard part is, what do we do about our interchange ramp terminals at I-84? Well, as you all know, that's that overpass over I-84 is a 2-lane roadway. It's got just enough width basically for one northbound lane and one southbound lane. You don't have left turn northbound and southbound left turn capacity at that interchange. And as you come off the freeway, they're just it's a single lane ramp. And at times, the traffic, particularly in the morning, will build on those ramps because of the demand trying to turn left is conflicted with demand north and southbound on Main Street, generated by the school and all the other development and other retail that exists in this area. And you start to have the makings of really a constrained environment that needs some major rethinking of itself. So what does all that look like? So we've tested a couple of things. The first of which, going back to our intersection number 2, Boardman and Main Street, is what are some of the scenarios? Now, these are just sketches. Please don't take photos of these and put them in the newspaper. They're not meant to be like implementation sketches. They're just trying to show what could we possibly do at these intersections to make them function better with extra capacity to accommodate this projected long-term demand, both existing and long-term. The first of which is on the left, would just be a very simple geometric enhancement that would widen and put better east-west geometry on Boardman, get rid of the on-street parking, and provide separate lefts and through right lanes on the east and west approaches. Now, it claims a little bit of on-street parking here in front of C and D, and then on the northwest corner of the intersection, but all that is sort of within the geometric purview of potential enhancement. It would generate enough traffic in the long run to probably trigger and meet all the appropriate warrants for traffic signalization. And so that is one option. The second option, which hasn't really been presented prior to now is what we're calling the mini roundabout scenario. Now, the mini roundabout scenario is a mini roundabout, if you're not familiar with that term, is a smaller version of a traditional roundabout. Its footprint is quite a bit smaller. It's something on the order of anywhere from kind of 80 to 120-ish feet of inscribed circle diameter. And what you typically have is a fully mountable center island. Now, and what that would allow for is, we've got a lot of fueling facilities, gas stations in this area, and we know we still have truck movements for certain oversized loads. So that fully mountable center island would be an option to potentially accommodate some of that unique demand in here. Whereas a traditional roundabout would have an apron in the middle, but it would have a center piece here that you wouldn't want to travel over. So a fully mountable would be a much lower profile scenario. Now, there's a lot of trade-offs and issues that would need to be addressed here, but I think if we're just kind of piecemealing what are the potential improvements, these are two options that are potentially on the table. They're not fully fleshed out. They certainly have their positives and their negatives, but these are two long-term options that the city could consider. And we have included some language in there, at least in the draft project list, that says one or the other, depending upon the circumstances. So that is, I think, one option we wanted to kick the can on a little bit and kind of get some reaction for. So let me pause and see what kind of comments or questions something like this generates from the group.
How do either of these two options shift in their feasibility if you went back to I-84, that one block back, and just did right only off of I-84, and we didn't do any left-hand turns off of I-84? So if you needed to get south, if you're headed westbound, you needed to get to south side of Boardman, you would get off at Laurel and come in off of the Wilson side. But if you needed to go north on Main Street from I-84, then you could go that way, right? So we're not turning a left across the bridge anymore, but you have to go right. In that scenario, in my head, the light presents a problem because all that traffic now has to go through the light and is waiting. And the roundabout makes more sense because you're fluid traffic through there. And if you need to go south, then you hit the roundabout and go around and come back across.
Even on the mini roundabout, you still see that there's a median there that is preventing the left-hand turn,
So
On both sketches, actually.
which is
In and out of
going to be a
businesses.
hindrance for anybody that lives on this side of town that's
So is there
being towards Pendleton.
no room coming off from Pendleton? So now you're gonna go north on Main Street, go around about to like a U-turn around that roundabout and turn around and go south. Is there no room in there for that?
There is room in there for that. The other thing that I'm taking into consideration is Boardman Avenue is a main bus route. Mid-Columbia Bus Company is right down the road from there, and the multiple buses coming out of there are gonna have a really hard time with that roundabout.
Luckily, the buses though come out at a time when traffic is a little bit less, because they come out about 6:30, because that's right around when I was walking to.
I'm so concerned about them being able to make the turn.
Oh, yeah.
Around
that's
the round.
true, yeah.
Where that's fully mountable, they can drive across the center of that still with the oversized loads or the buses and that, correct?
In
So-
theory, yeah. The mountable, fully mountable would be allowing for some of those larger vehicles that need the extra maneuverability. Buses probably get around that without having to drive it over. I'm talking about fueling trucks and semi-tractor trailers, things like that.
That is also our high, wide, and heavy access westbound.
I'm a little concerned about pedestrians. How the crosswalks will work and holding up traffic.
So with the roundabout, luckily, and I say this as a pedestrian using the roundabout that's right outside the city hall here. It shouldn't, hopefully, especially if we add all 4 of those intersections in like it's drawn in the roundabout, because the kids will be able to split out on the north and east side, depending on where they want to go, whether they go to Sinclair or to the Chevron or C&D or whatever. And then it'll disperse that through the roundabout, because the kids won't have to stick to a north and east route. They'll be able to go east through and then go east north, so it'll hopefully spread out traffic. And then people, like they have to do now with the blinker, will just have to be a little bit more careful. Which hopefully they'll do, especially as I've made a lot of speak about pedestrian safety in the different info groups and whatnot.
And in roundabouts, it tend to be pulled back from the where you're stopping. So there's this place for a car to stop, the intersection, and then having the rest queuing up, especially in this type of roundabout. So there is room for a car to kind of be like, maybe go in front of a pedestrian, but leaving the room for the pedestrian. So it's not like they're gonna like hit them as they're going. They're gonna see them, decide not to stop, and then go. Is these types of roundabouts tend to be.
I'm not trying to oversell this roundabout idea, but because we're kicking it out into the ether here for the first time, on the screen here, I'm showing what a fully mountable roundabout looks like. Doesn't necessarily mean it's applicable to what we might potentially consider in Boardman, but as you can see, the center island is a much lower profile. It is mountable in the sense that a vehicle that needs a larger sweep path could physically drive right over it without impacting its showing in load scenarios. So this is an idea of what it could look like, as opposed to a more traditional roundabout that has the apron and then a non-mountable element more in the center of the circle. So there's just an idea, a visual of what a fully mountable one looks like, and you can kind of see the truck lines of how they would use and turn over a lower profile scenario like this.
Does that have to be elevated at all? I'm a little bit concerned with a low boy situation where they're low anyway. Does that have to be raised at all, or could it just be a concrete at grade versus asphalt to visually delineate that difference, right?
Yeah, you want a little bit of vertical delineation, or it just becomes sort of the Wild West. And I'm not trying to oversell this one and say it is the solution to all of our problems. It's an option put on the table, and I know there's a lot of people. Marlo, I see your hand raised, and I'm sure you got an opinion or comment to share. And I'll go ahead and make that comment here in a second, but I think this is just an idea. I wasn't trying to suggest it is the one and only solution, but one to potentially consider. So Marlo, go ahead.
Thanks, Matt. I'm glad you're bringing this up as a solution. I think, for folks that are concerned about trucks, we are designing and building roundabouts on the state highway system that are accommodating 300-foot long transformers, right? And the city itself can just set the parameters on what truck they want or bus they want it to be designed for, and it can all be made to happen. You pick your design vehicle, and the engineers at Kittleson or whomever can make that happen for you. I think personally, it's a great idea for Boardman. If you think about off-peak, you're going to be generating a lot of extra delay at your traffic signal, right? Like Boardman's still a small town whilst growing. The light is red half the time. And so at a roundabout, if no one's there, you get to go. So the roundabout will be a lot friendlier to everybody in town. All those off-peak hours. I just recently went to Bend and drove through 25 roundabouts, and everybody's just rolling through roundabouts continuously, and we're stopping at signals. And there are pros and cons to each, but off peak, I think, drivers and residents are going to enjoy a roundabout, and it's going to operate a lot more efficiently. There may be some benefits to peak times for your signal. But, if that's 1 hour a day or 2 hours a day, the other 22 hours a day, the roundabout's going to be a lot more fluid and still provide great traffic calming, which is something a lot of small towns want, right? Speed control, slowing people down, that kind of thing.
So Steve Davis has his hand up. Steven, you wanna go? You're unmuted, but we're not hearing you.
Never mind.
Okay.
I do have a question.
Okay.
First, rather than put the mini roundabout there at that intersection, why aren't we putting the roundabout at the off ramp?
Good question.
Okay, so now you're stealing my presentation thunder
Oh,
here,
sorry.
so let me get to that one here in a second.
So, before we move to the mini roundabout though, prior to the recent, request for the city to put the light in, we did evaluate the roundabout at a very limited level. And our concern with the roundabout was the built environment, mostly conflicts with the C&D and then the old city hall. So the southeast quadrant and then the northwest quadrant. So, it has its drawbacks as well. As much as I don't disagree with Marlo's comments, about, the 22 hours versus the 2 hours. I don't know if that's the right analysis, but it's probably pretty close. The concern that got raised from an engineering perspective as we were looking at the mini roundabout was the built environment and was there truly enough space to do that? So again, I applaud Matt for putting it as an alternative. I think we should have them both in there as alternatives coming from a city staff perspective. I don't want to get so hung up that the roundabout is the solution, because again, I'm not convinced it could be, but again, as an alternative, I think it's a good thing.
I know that roundabouts are generally frowned upon in our region, right? They're just cursed and hated because it's not something we utilize, and I don't particularly love them myself, right? And just because other people don't know how to use them, right? That's everybody's excuse. My question to your concern, which is completely valid, the northeast corner, right? Besides the fact that it has the northwest corner, besides the fact that that's old city hall there, what is the longevity of that building? As we're looking at a 20-year plan,
Right.
How long is that building really going to be?
Could it be redeveloped, and could redevelopment make it look different?
And same with the C&D, right? As much as we all love C&D and it is a fixture for what is Boardman, what is the long-term longevity of that physical structure? And if it was to be redeveloped, what does that look like?
Right, it is encroaching. I mean, there are some physical setback issues that we have. So, good points on both sides. So again, I'm glad it's in there. I'm glad we're looking at it as an alternative, and certainly timeline is gonna answer as many questions as it asks.
Right, and if I owned C&Ds, right, my opinion of that would be a completely different scenario.
Yeah.
No, but
Yes.
not.
You're gonna be losing all of their parking along the side. They lose all of it. And I can tell you that Jennifer and Dino are not happy about that.
Well, I mean, traffic's gonna be going by from me to that wall, from the wall from CD.
And that is completely valid, right?
I still have concerns with the roundabout because of pedestrians. You're talking school pedestrians.
Yeah.
And I'm just like.
I just don't think it's a great spot there. For that same reason, because of all the kids that are walking.
What about just moving that roundabout up one more block then?
That's what I think.
That's what I said. I would say, why not,
Yeah.
why not at the
I
office?
don't think.
No, instead of the off ramp, go to the Columbia.
I don't think a ramp at Columbia is gonna be good, or like a roundabout at Columbia is gonna be good, because that bridge is at such an angle that if you're coming off Northwest Columbia, you cannot see people coming over that bridge. And that's both as a driver and a pedestrian, like that intersection is just there's space to do it there, because that intersection is really, really wide. But I don't think a roundabout at Columbia would be as good as a roundabout at Boardman.
And that bridge is way better than it was before, because it was almost straight up before.
Well, and the grade issues with that bridge may make a roundabout problematic there. Because we looked at a roundabout over off the Port Moro interchange, and it's the grade issues of the road. You can't get out big enough with the roundabout and still have a way to maneuver because you're coming down a hill or going up a hill, and the hill conflicts with the roundabout. So the roundabout is now like a ramp speedway.
It's like a skate park.
It's like a skate park for cars. Also,
I think Carla made a really good point. We ran into this many times over the last few years, is irregardless of what the plan ends up being, having every option on the table in the planning document is gonna save somebody a bunch of effort
later.
10 years from now.
Yes.
Irregardless of the direction they go.
Right, wrong, or indifferent.
Right.
Having every option on the table is beneficial.
I agree. Yes, having both of them in there as options is the way we want to go. And there should be enough analysis now to say both could potentially work, and when you get to design, you'll figure it out.
Also, to George's point about pedestrian safety in the high school, like one of their safety days could be about how to use a roundabout. Like there are ways that we can teach the kids how to use a roundabout and how to be safe in those spaces that are already at the schools. Cause I know Sam Boardman does a safety day as their last day of the thing. The police could talk about roundabouts there. Like there are ways around getting the kids to be safe in a roundabout. Like your point is totally valid, but there are solutions to that.
You should also move the pedestrian crossing back to
Yeah, like in
back to
Steve's,
the next street.
like in
You know,
Steve Davis's picture, like you can see how far back those crossings are.
Right, and the crossing across Boardman Avenue to the east could be moved back to First.
That's what I'm doing. All the way to
Yeah.
first. You know, you're gonna be going south anyway.
Right,
You have a crossing.
Yep.
With a flashing light, put it back in First Street.
Yep.
Come in the back way to the C and D for lunch instead of coming across in front.
yep, and that would push all the northbound crossing also to the south.
Yep.
You could do that on both sides, you just put all the pedestrians on one side.
Yep.
So thought.
Yep. Well, and a lot of that is, that's implementation level, details that typically TSPs don't have to think too hardly about. I guess maybe what I'm hearing is I'm not hearing no. Certainly there are some challenges of both, but keeping both in as an option, I agree. I think it makes some sense as a project for consideration.
So Matt, I'm doing a time check. We're down the wire. I think we need to move to your next slide.
Yeah, we have till 12:30, correct?
Yeah, I think so, yeah, but I know you still got a few to get through.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to be conscientious, so.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm watching the clock as well. So are you
Okay.
ready? Because now's where it really gets really nasty. Okay, here's the big picture challenge with our Main Street overpass interchange. Let me go back to this graphic for a second. So we know we've got a limited bridge structure. Now it's limited for two really important reasons. One, it's one lane northbound, one lane southbound. You don't have the ability to have separated lefts and right turns to get on the freeway ramp terminals, the east and west freeway ramp terminals, or on ramps. It's also got another pretty significant limitation in the sense that its vertical clearance on I-84 is not to desirable standards or dimensions. Any high load coming east-west on I-84 has to actually exit the freeway on these ramps and then cross over the intersection and then back down in order to get east-west through here. So it is a limited intersection or limited overpass for those two really important reasons. So one of the things that we've found is when you look at the capacity of these freeway ramp terminals themselves, and ignore the details on this image, I know you're going to want to look at it, but if you look at those interchange ramp terminals, we're projecting a lot of traffic growth through this interchange for reasons previously stated. There's single lane ramps at the interchange terminals. There's no north and southbound left turn lanes. And as you probably already know and have experienced during certain times of the day, you wait quite a bit coming off the freeway to make us like an east or westbound left turn to go south. Particularly during peak school times, and you got some traffic backup and queuing that's occurring on these ramps. So I think one of the big findings we're finding is if we can't find an alternative to mitigate the Main Street demand, and we don't think we've got one, even with Olson as an option, there's still going to be a lot of north-south traffic on Main Street. That's going to limit the capacity of these ramp terminals. And one of the things we found is that roundabouts at these ramp terminals they don't have enough capacity. There's only so much capacity you could squeeze into a roundabout, and the demand that we're projecting in the long term just a roundabout isn't going to cut it. So looking at these intersections as signalized intersections makes a lot more sense. However, for reasons noted, you can't just plop a signal at those ramp terminals today and expect them to resolve all of your issues. So one of the big kind of realizations is even if you were to signalize these ramps, you've got to pretty much redo the entire interchange. And that list looks like the following. You've got to upgrade your on and off ramps. And this is just a sketch showing what that potential realignment might look like. But you'd want at least a separate left and right lanes coming off both the east and west ramps. Now, again, this is just a sketch, but that in order to accommodate those, it necessitates some realignment and some geometric modifications. The big ticket item is at the overpass itself, because it's limited in its vertical clearance and it doesn't have the widening capacity or capability. You pretty much are rebuilding the overpass in any scenario. Now, this is just one version of that that probably is even not sufficient in certain levels. This is showing a 3-lane overpass. More than likely, you're going to need a 4-lane overpass where your northbound and your southbound left turns are side by side, as opposed to using the same back-to-back space. So you end up with a complete rebuild of this overpass and the interchange. And I think that's the really significant, uncomfortable finding that we're generating here is the long-term future of Boardman with growth unabated and continuing to be a mixture of new residential and new freeway-oriented users in this area is going to necessitate some big picture thinking about how this interchange looks and functions and how it potentially is redesigned. And I don't think we've got the ability to flesh all of that out within the confines of this TSP. These sketches are just sketches. I just included them so that you have some kind of a visual of what kind of an impact it has. And if I was to zoom in, you can see the outer line here is quite a bit wider than the aerial underneath it. And if you were to make this a 4-lane overpass as opposed to the sketched 3, then you're pushing back the tapering and the impacts upstream and downstream of the overpass itself. So I think that's the future of Boardman, is needing to identify and really start to think about its partnering with ODOT and others to really kind of start to tackle what is forecast to be a pretty significant challenge for the city when you start thinking about the growth over a near and, more importantly, a long-term scenario. And that's an uncomfortable question I think we're all going to be facing going forward. So now that I dropped that bomb on everybody, comments, questions?
What are the possible costs of doing that? That's the big thing.
Yeah, there's an M after it for millions and an unknown number.
That.
Yeah. I guess let's just assume that there's money out there for something like this. Even if it was determined that what's sketched here is the most appropriate scenario going forward, how do you build something like this and keep things open to traffic? Now, there's a lot of tricks and tips from the construction industry that can mitigate that, but if you're rebuilding your entire overpass, how do you do that?
Just like they did when they did the I-84 or I-82 overpass.
I guess ideally, you keep the existing overpass open, right, while you build the new one adjacent to it, but you've got a built environment through here that doesn't really allow for a realigned Main Street without significantly impacting one or more of the parcels east and west of Main Street. So it almost feels like you're kind of hemmed in a little bit here. Is if you're going to rebuild it, you almost have to rebuild it on its current alignment, and in doing so, you almost have to shut it down in order to rebuild it. And what does that mean? You know, how long does that take, and how much disruption does that mean to the community while it's under construction? It just opens up a can of worms of questions that are really hard to answer within the confines of this TSP. But all of the forecasting work and all the analysis that we've done suggests that it is going to be necessary, and it is going to be an uncomfortable necessity going forward. So.
Like you just said, Heather, why does it have to be one wide instead of two wide, right? Instead of one 4-lane, do two lanes, right? So you build one just to the east of that is going to be take the place of it while you tear this one down and then build your one west of that.
Like they did with the I-82 straight over.
Right, so that then northbound would be on the east side and westbound would be on the west side. You'd have 2 overpasses, and then you could make them both higher, which would alleviate that traffic.
It's only a matter of time before that bridge gets hit again. I know of at least 5 times just in the last several years, and that bridge is gonna collapse. This last time it was pretty significant.
So Devin has his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Devin.
Yeah, when? What does your analysis say when this happens?
Yeah, we didn't break it down on a sort of expected to occur within X time period. It's just, you know, we kind of, in these TSPs, you sort of look at what you have today and then what you could have in a 20-year scenario. My best guess to that question is it's within 20 years, most definitely. It's not tomorrow, but it's not 19 years either. So.
And this is a multi-year project, so I don't think Boardman can afford to be without this overpass for a year. So I think the only option is to build adjacent and then rebuild, right? Like,
I'm no engineer or contractor, so I wouldn't need, but yeah. Well, and Mike Lees is on the call as well, so I'm sure Jacob and Mike can put their heads together and figure out how to do this with no interruptions, and
We built it in China, it'd be done in 48 hours.
there we go.
We can call the Amish community. They can do it in 8 days.
Right. So, I mean,
We're just saying we're ODOT be able to do this.
yeah.
Is ODOT willing to do this? Because I know that it's been brought up before.
well, and back to your point, what is ODOT? We know they're running those in the background, right? What is ODOT forecasting this to be hit again, right? If it's been hit 5 times in the last however many years you said.
Yeah, well, it just got hit again last year, and it was enough that they shut down the bridge for an extended period of time to analyze, to see how much damage, to see if it was still gonna stand.
Right, so at some point it becomes a requirement, as I-84 is a major thoroughfare for our region and the nation, right? So coming in and out it.
Well, and we know that when the high loads go over the off and then on ramp, they're not stopping, they're just literally going over. The eastbound, it's very noticeable. Westbound, less so, and I think there's less that go westbound. But the current layout of that eastbound off ramp and on ramp is such that the gouging in the current off ramp in particular, less on the on ramp, but on the off ramp is pretty significant.
They shut it down. They've got the flaggers out there
Yep.
so that it can just ease over, and it still just takes chunks out of that road.
Yeah, so there are significant issues, and I hope we capture all of them as issues in the TSP so that you know, folks know what our concerns are. But Devin, you still had your hand up?
Yeah, I'm still waiting. It's in 20 years. So, is there a possibility of an interim solution? Should we be looking at what we can do between now and then? I know it's going to fail, but it's going to happen in the horizon. So we should probably figure out a way to at least interimly address the issue.
I think what we're trying to say though is it shouldn't be 20 years.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna last that
It
long.
should be soon, or as soon as government works, of course.
Mhm.
But this is an issue that needs to happen soon. That bridge needs to be extended and the off ramps need to be extended. That whole thing needs to be worked on.
Well, and even if it could be done in phases, I mean, even if
Yeah.
as an ODOT project, you know, addressing the orientation or the alignment of the on and off ramps, if that was done, then that would facilitate the next phase. I mean, would there be a way to take this huge project And from a project management perspective, break it into reasonable parts that you could do over time. So Devin lowered his hand, Marlo's got his up.
Yeah, thanks. I think, you know, when you're talking about ODOT, right, like we have to also think about this is a very important bridge to Boardman, right? But on the greater ODOT system, there's hundreds of bridges. And I think it's easy, you know, from a Boardman local perspective to think this needs to be a super high priority. And I don't disagree. This is the key to your town, right? But from an ODOT perspective, there's a lot of bridges, a lot of them built in the same era, a lot of them with this same issue, right? We, you know, in Region 5, you know, Eastern Oregon, we're not replacing interstate bridges yet. We're just fixing the decks. So it's, you know, from a bridge maintenance standpoint, you know, we could probably hold on to this bridge for another 100 years or whatever. It needs to be some kind of big specific grant funding, like a raise grant or some mega kind of a grant for, you know, this to rise to the top and kind of driven by the local needs, local politicians, right? Like Hamilton tried to do an Exit 209 project and they did multiple rounds for a raise grant. It's just going to be hard, you know, from a statewide level to prioritize this bridge. Yes, it gets hit. I hear what you're saying. I think that we just don't have enough money for all of those things, right? So it needs to be driven differently and looked at, well, how can we make this a priority for the state, or, you know, what's Boardman, Morrow County doing to bring this to the forefront? Because we have other bridges that are low, other bridges that are getting hit. I think interim solutions are a great thing. Like, can we adjust the ramps? Can we do signals in the interim, you know, to get us another 20 years? Because this bridge is still young. It's 50 years old or thereabouts, right? And we're on a 900-year bridge replacement path right now. So we're a few years away on all of our bridges. And I hope there's a solution for Boardman. It's just there's a lot of needs and not enough money in that respect. So interim solutions I think are a great thing to be thinking about.
There's at least 3 comments here in the room. I guess I want to throw out that I don't know how many of the folks in the room are also aware the county is doing an interchange area management project or adopting a plan for the Tower Road interchange. But that bridge too is also insufficient. And that project is going to envision the bridge to continue to the north over the UP main line. And I mean, I think the elephant in the room is that the industry that has emerged in Umatilla and Morrow counties and now Gillum County over the past almost 20 years, I believe is identified as an industry of significance for the state, not just for the region. And both of these projects, including, I think even you could argue the improvements that we need at the Port Morrow interchange, are all really important and are all being driven by the growth that has been created by this industry of, I think, statewide significance. So I just think we need to figure out how we keep that in mind too, that this isn't just growth based on our traditional ag industry. This is a new industry. It's an emerging industry, and I'm glad I'm seeing heads going up and down and not back and forth. I think it's an industry that we need to be really cognizant of. And if Marlo's right, and we're only going to get there if we figure out how to parlay this conversation into something that gets not only our state representatives' attention, but our federal representatives' attention, then maybe we need to figure out how to do that. So we've got several people in the room. So Patrick,
It's only as important to ODOT as we say it is in this plan. Right? So we need to upsell that with as much valid data as we can implement in that, right? And so we talked about when we were back at the Olson Lane, right? We talked about going over, going under, looking at this again with our elevation issues. If the trucks are already going over, maybe we bring in the dirt and we tunnel the main street through in 4 lanes as opposed to going over I-84, right? And then we bring the dirt up to pave over. Maybe that's the solution to our height issue and our high, heavy, and wide load issue. while also allowing us to get the width and the capacity we need for Main Street to go through. Maybe that's just the outside of the box thought to the other side of this coin, as opposed to elevating those workers and paying that crew to work, that we just bring in the dirt, that's dirt work to fill that whole thing in, except for the 4 lanes wide, whatever it needed to be to make that accomplished. But it's only as important as we say it is in this plan. And if we say it's not a priority, then it's sure not going to raise on their list.
I just want to say that what Marlo is saying is correct. I called ODOT not a few months ago, but like within the last year. And the data he's giving, that 900-year estimate, was the same one I got on the phone from the person I talked to at ODOT there. I think what Marlo is trying to say is if we can find the funding and make it a priority, like you were saying, then they'll do it. That's the biggest thing between the phone call and what Marlo was saying just now, is that if the city can find the funding and present it that way. I think also, to your point, if we get Greg Smith involved, because he just posted on Facebook about how they're talking about funding a new bridge in Congress, or in our state legislature right now, that goes over Columbia to connect Washington to
The I-5 replacement.
that one. So it's already on the state's mind. So if we combine your two ideas, then hopefully we'll get something done, before either somebody hits the bridge or a pedestrian like me gets hit in one of those intersections, because I've almost been hit in both sides of the bridge multiple times.
Yeah. Multiple issues. Okay, so Devin's got his hand up again.
I'm back for more. I see, 2 steps to this process. There's what Matt has to do here for a TSP update. And this project comes out within his 20-year horizon, so we need to address it somehow. How it happens, the priority of how it happens, is more a function of your political process. Your area commission on transportation is probably the starting point for this discussion. These are the people that are in your region that are focused on your transportation issues. They're the ones that elevate projects and concepts within the region and bring them politically to the right people. So this is going to come out. We're going to have an issue here, but we're going to need to address it best we can, the TSP, how it's elevated, how it's funded, what it looks like. More area commission on transportation, more of a political process as I see it. If I'm wrong, somebody can connect me here to the correct process, but elevating it isn't something that's going to happen during the TSP process. Again, that's more of an area commission on transportation end of the spectrum.
I agree, Devin. Just a quick time check. We're 15 minutes shy of our end time here. So let me try and put a bow on this one, at least for the time minute. Is I think when it comes to the TSP, we definitely want to recognize our findings. I think it's important to recognize the challenges associated with this existing interchange and a range of solutions. TSPs don't generally get to the ability to fine tune and plan the specifics. I think we can say, generally speaking, that your AMP terminals are insufficient. Traffic control improvement needs, your overpass is insufficient from a height and from a capacity standpoint and from a modernization standpoint. Therefore, it needs to be upgraded or modified. But we don't have to get into the nuanced details of how and why and specifically what are the details, other than to recognize it. That all comes about, as part of a separate effort. I just want to make sure that before we leave today that, generally speaking, are we all sort of in agreement that yes, we want to include in our TSP a recognition of these findings and a list of projects that outline a full-scale interchange upgrade and modernization to reflect the travel demands that we're projecting. Because if we don't, and we recognize that while that's not easy and it's uncomfortable, you put yourself in a scenario where you're likely putting a moratorium on your development going forward, because you recognize that your interchange isn't going to continue to absorb that demand. Now, naturally, you get a little bit of natural moratorium when developers recognize they're not going to continue to invest in the city. But we don't necessarily want to see that happen. So we need to reflect that and make sure it gets added to the TSP. So I think we're all in agreement that something like this should be included, but it is a major project and is not an easy implementable solution. So.
We've got another question in the room.
Yeah, so we all know that the bottleneck is the on-ramp or the bridge, right?
Mhm.
Why are we trying to mitigate the bottleneck? It's still gonna be the bottleneck. We're still gonna have the problem. So why are we spending money on mitigating that bottleneck? I mean, we're still gonna have it. We're still gonna have those problems. Why don't we concentrate on the bottleneck instead of spending money elsewhere? Save our money, spend it on the bridge and help the bridge, because ODOT's not gonna help us. So why don't we concentrate on this is how we can solve the problem by actually doing what ODOT can't?
I think that's where I'm going with how we elevate this I mean, so Marlo's comment was, this is our priority. I think we should elevate the argument so it's not just our priority as the city of Boardman, but that it becomes a regional priority because we have an industry of statewide significance here. And it's not just our community and this bridge, but it's a broader community and additional projects that need to happen. And rather than funding this bridge, I don't know, but let's just say this bridge and all of that work is $50 million. Well, the Tower Road Bridge is probably $50 million. And why go ask for 50 million twice when we just could go ask for 100 million and get them both done and maybe figure out how to get the roundabout in at the Port Morrow interchange at the same time, because that's significantly less expensive in comparison. So I think it's about elevating it. I don't disagree, Dave. Anything we do, we're gonna have to come up with some, if we go get a grant, and I don't even know what they're called these days. There's one version that used to be called a Tiger Grant. I don't know, maybe that's the build grant now, but whichever one it is, we're gonna have a match. And that's gonna have to be a match that's a city match, a port match, a county match, maybe an industry match to get to that, again, $100 million. That's just a figure. I don't know how close I am to right or wrong. But if we're gonna just do the three interchanges in Morrow County, I don't think I'm very far off. Two of those are in the city, one's in the county, and they all need to be done because they all impact this community and they all impact the industry of, I'm just gonna be calling it an industry of statewide significance because I think it is.
So I think our verbiage matters. So you spoke to our region, which is very important. You spoke to our statewide significance. I feel like our verbiage, we need to elevate this to a national issue, right? Like, because Morrow County feeds the nation,
Right.
This is of national significance. And by elevating that right now, we're going past ODOT, we're going into the FDA, we're going into federal money. Like, let's elevate our language. And again, while there's a little bit of tongue in cheek in that, it does matter when you start elevating those things in the verbiage of your plan to make sure that this is important. And it's not important to Boardman because nobody cares about Boardman except for us who are here in Boardman. Nobody cares about Morrow County except for the 16,000 people that live here in Morrow County. But now when we start talking about those industries on the national scale, on the world scale, that's when we start getting a hold of those earlobes of people that can actually make some difference.
Yeah, so Marlo wants to chime in again.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be super brief. I really like what Kyla's last statement. I think, thinking about this, collectively with the other bridges is a great idea. And I just wanted to say one thing about, it's not that, and I don't speak for ODOT, entirely at all. It's like ODOT wants to help here. We just don't have money for bridges that aren't falling down, and so I think when you guys getting together and driving a collective grant is an excellent way to do it. And ODOT Region 5 is here to help you do that. We helped Hamilton with their grant for a long time, and we are stoked to help you folks do that. We just don't have discretionary money for interchanges, and I think Devin's right that the acts are another great place to make your voices heard and make this a regional and state priority.
Yep. Devin, your hand?
Well, surprisingly, this is why we're all here. to do planning for a TSP update. We identified a major problem that we knew might have been a problem. We realized it's a significant problem. What's the first step in solving this problem? It's doing this TSP update. So Matt can do the analysis to show what the traffic growth is in 20 years and what we need to have happen here. So that's why we do what we do. That's why you're all in the room, is we identify these issues and move on. And I'll let Matt have it because we're running out of time, but that's why we do what we do. That's why you got funded with the TGM grant to do this work, is because to find these issues and get them resolved. So yeah, it's an issue, but this is the first step in the solution, is getting it planned, getting the analysis done and moving on.
Okay. Well, let me sort of conclude with,
Just Kevin.
I think the scenario, best case scenario going forward is we want to make sure we get a project like this included in there. Now, there's a lot of detail here. We'll get the supporting analysis out to you all here shortly that goes into the specifics. I know Marlo and the folks at TPAL who like to review the technical side will be very interested in some of our details. We'll make sure that's available. I just want to get the temperature and the reading and the understanding from the folks on the call here that this is, just as we stated, pretty important challenge for the city to undertake. Let me move on. There's a couple of other figures in here we're not going to have time to really dive into, but we've got a pedestrian projects figure. So all of these projects represent improvements that the city should consider on its existing network, as well as projects that would help to tie the city together more from a pedestrian standpoint. So there's any number of projects on here.
Yeah,
some of these are roadway upgrades. Some of these are new facilities and new crossings. Sorry, Carla, were you trying to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Matt, that this gets augmented, I think, by what's happening with our Parks Master Plan as well, because it's also really talking about connectivity, whether it be trails or sidewalks. So yeah, these kind of get married. This figure kind of gets married with what we're dealing with the Parks Master Plan also.
Exactly. And I will point out a nuance on here is even though we've got roadways like Oregon Trail Boulevard being extended, we didn't include a pedestrian project on that simply because we know when that gets built, it's not going to get built without pedestrian accommodation. So anything that you see on this map here is an upgrade to an existing corridor where a sidewalk doesn't exist today. So that's kind of an important distinction to make here, is why aren't we showing projects on some of these new roads? Well, because they're going to get built with those, and that's what your standards say and how they should get built. So we didn't separate those projects out. We have a similar bicycle project. So the green lines represent kind of new bike infrastructure, such as new bike lanes or multi-use trails. The orange lines represent, sort of a recognition that you don't necessarily need bike lanes on every one of your streets, but maybe some enhanced shared lane markings and other design, signing and striping treatments that would help cyclists and motorists understand that some of these roads are at a volume level that you don't need separate facilities, but a shared lane scenario would make a lot of sense. So some of these roads are physical improvements, some of them are signing and striping modifications that would designate shared lane conditions. And I didn't include the transit projects map because it's less visual, but there's any number of sort of policy and transit level improvement projects. So we're almost at time. So let me pause and make sure there isn't any other kind of critical questions regarding these projects and the maps that we've shown to date.
I didn't see the project for Brent Drive and Main.
I'm sorry, repeat the location again.
Main Street and Marine Drive.
Oh, Main Street and Marine. Are we talking about up here?
Yeah, at the Y.
Yeah. So there was a PED project that would add a sidewalk to the bridge going over the railroad and kind of connecting it down. And I think what we're recognizing is that the intersection and the geometry is so kind of funky and odd that maybe it would be better to route pedestrians around it. So that's the P2, is bringing a sidewalk over the overpass and connecting it down to Marine Drive on the west side, and then connecting it back to sort of that existing multi-use pathway that exists on the north side of Marine Drive. So that was our solution there. It's not really detailed in these maps, but that's something that we had thought of that might make some sense there, given the geometry and the oddity of that intersection. So. And whether or not you agree with that, I would certainly be willing to discuss that further. But that was what we had come up with to better accommodate that scenario. And certainly be willing to take your comments offline if you want to discuss it further.
Yep. So I just want to encourage everybody, the draft documents are posted on the website and at the conclusion of this meeting, either Matt or Isa are going to send me the PowerPoint slides and we'll post those. And then once the meeting summary is done, we'll post the meeting summary. We'll also post the video there. The attachments document is 145 pages. And if you're really a geek, you'll love it because it gets into all kinds of tables and graphs. But the shorter introductory document, just kind of the document itself is only about 37 pages. A number of those are kind of white because the figure goes in. You can print the figures as well. It's a separate document on there. So if you want to get into that and read through it, please do. Again, Matt will send a refinement to that probably before our June 3rd. I'm hoping before our June 3rd work session with the Planning Commission and City Council. That work session will start at 5:30 on June 3rd. I think it's June 3rd. It's whatever that first Tuesday is. And then if you have any questions about all the other projects we're doing, I'm happy to answer those. But again, you can find all of the projects on the city's website. Again, if you go to community and go to the strategic planning page, they're all there. And I don't think I have anything to add at the end here other than one last pitch. We're having a Parks Master Plan community meeting today outside, right here at City Hall Park at 4 o'clock. I'm hoping the weather holds and we will have some ice cream. So if you want to be outside where it's cold and eat ice cream and look at park projects and help us rank them, please come. Anyway, any final questions or anything before we wrap up? And if you have any, you guys all have my email address. So if you've got comments, if you want to connect with Matt and Isa, just reach out to me and I will forward your comments, whatever they may be. So again, thank all of you, those of you in the room and those of you online, for participating, being a part of the PAC. Your input is incredibly valuable to this process. So thank you very much.
This is our last public advisory meeting.
Is this our last PAC meeting, Matt, or is there?
Yeah, officially correct. We'll communicate via email going forward. So like the drafts of the TSP, those will all be made available for your review and comment. We just won't have a physical meeting like we're having right now to go over the details. So that'll be kind of on your own to review and provide comments. So.
And then there will be a joint work session with the PAC and the Planning Commission and the council prior to the hearings process. So we will bring you all back together one more time in a more formal work session with all of the Planning Commission members and all of the City Council members. So we don't have that on the calendar yet, but we'll get there. So thank you.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. I know it was a lot to take in, but I appreciate it.
All right,